Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
It's finally time to talk about Avatar, the live action series. We're gonna talk about the animated series, okay? We're gonna do that. But first, I wanna talk about this series as it is, just as it exists on its own. And then don't worry, we'll get to the animated series because it is an adaptation, so I do have to talk about that. Just to establish. Also, fair warning, spoilers ahead. But you know what won't be spoiled for you? This series in comparison to the M. Night Shyamalan movie that we got. Thank goodness we don't have to refer to that anymore, because this is the live action adaptation that I think most of us have been waiting for, and I'm very proud to say it is way better than the M. Night Shyamalan movie. So, thank you. Now we can pretend that never happened. Also, yes, there will be spoilers ahead. But regardless of whether or not you continue past that point, I just wanted you to know that important fact. I think the opening of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action series, which I also gotta say, I love that I'm wearing like Netflix stuff. This is not intentional. Not sponsored by Netflix, but Netflix, call me. Call me up if you want to sponsor me. I feel like the opening of this Netflix live action series is something that really sets the tone for the show. So if you're watching the opening of the first episode and you're like, nah, I don't know about this, then yeah, I don't know if this show will be for you, because that is what it is like. It's very suspenseful. You're right in the action. Bending is right in your face. You're in it. And I gotta say, the bending looks so good. Straight out the gate, I was like riveted, because I was just like, oh my gosh, we're getting live action bending, and it looks like really, really good. Especially for this being like a television series as well. Like sometimes I just think about that and I'm like, man, it looks so cinematic at times. So for me, I really liked the beginning, the suspense, the action, the bending. It just throws you right into it, and I appreciated that about it. From there, we go in to see Fire Lord, and we get to see the sort of inside of the Fire Nation and sort of the inner court and what that's like. We're right in the threat, in the danger zone. And overall, I gotta say, I still really liked the direction here, but we're setting up from the beginning that like the Fire Nation is really, really bad. And it feels like that through line continues through the entire show. And I'm hoping that we just get a little bit more depth with the Fire Nation, because it feels like the whole overall idea is just Fire Nation so evil. Evil, evil Fire Nation. This whole place is really evil. A lot of where we see the humanity in, you know, the Fire Nation is through specific characters like Zuko and Iroh, and even to an extent Azula, and I would say Lieutenant G. So we do see some humanity and some depth, but only through those characters. It's like we're peering through a window into the humanity of the Fire Nation. So I'm hoping that in future seasons, we're going to get more of a look at the landscape and how people just live. We also get to see like a little bit of an uprising, I guess, but it's not, we don't get into it that much. And I just want to get into that a little bit more. When it comes to us learning more about the world and the characters, we also sort of from the beginning, we go into this immediate action, getting to see a little bit behind the curtain of the Fire Nation. And then of course we get into the origin story of our protagonist, our hero, Aang, who we know as the Avatar, and sadly, the Last Airbender. I gotta say, Aang's origin is super cute. I really, really liked it. Other than the part where obviously everyone tragically dies. That part's not so cute. But just Aang in general is introduced to us as this really cute, like sort of innocent character who's pretty optimistic overall and is very playful. I wish we got to see a little bit more of that in the show, because I think one of the things that is unfortunate is that Aang doesn't get a lot of time to be a kid. And yeah, I know he's the Avatar, but he really doesn't get a lot of time to be a kid. It's like him trying to like be a kid and then everyone constantly reminding him that he can't be a kid anymore. It's just a lot. In general, let's talk about sort of the main characters here. We have Katara, we also have Sokka. They're also introduced pretty early on, and they also are kids who don't get a lot of time to be kids. So that's something that it's a bit of an issue that I have with the show overall. At most, I would say Sokka and Katara are dealing with having to grow up really fast. And they're dealing with a lot of trauma related to the loss of their family and having kind of identity crises in regards to who they are as people and where they belong, sort of, especially without a family, but also just as they go on in the world and like who do they want to become and what type of people do they want to be. I think a thing that most of us can relate to, as we were all once kids and had to figure that out. And even as adults, most of us realize when we grow up, guess what? You don't actually ever know who you are. So I always feel like that's a very relatable journey, and I do feel that here. It's just unfortunate that like there's just so much of that. Like it can be really heavy at moments. Overall, the story of Avatar in the live action, you don't have to have watched the animated version of this story, I think, to enjoy the live action version, but I'll give you a little brief synopsis of what it's about in case you wanted to know that, in case you are watching this before you watch the live action version for some reason. And if you're watching this before you've watched the live action version or ever watched the animated show, which I don't know why you'd be here, but hello, if that's you, let me know in the comments. Basically, the story of Avatar is that in this show is that Avatar is a story about Aang. He's basically the last airbender. He's kind of like a kid that gets thrown out of his own time. And while he's gone, the Fire Nation take over all of the kingdoms pretty much for the most part. And now he's returned and he has to try to restore balance. He's got like a big problem to deal with because everything's really out of balance. And now he's got to like karate chop it, wind whip it back into balance. He ends up going on this quest to do this with his newfound friends, Katara and Sokka. And he sets out on a journey in this first season, or this first book in the animated show, to master sort of water. Or well, that's what it is supposed to be. It's the Book of Water. So it's supposed to be about, you know, water bending. Aang doesn't really do a lot of water bending in this show though, in this season, but Katara does a lot of water bending in this show, and that's what it's supposed to be about. So I don't know if he really masters it by the end. He definitely gets in there though by the end. He kind of becomes one with the ocean. So we'll count that. I'm gonna say check mark. If you've become one with the ocean, you are now a master of water. Along the way, he also tries to help out people that he comes across. So he kind of gets pulled into little side quests here and there by also acknowledging the fact that if he's the Avatar, it's also about helping, you know, the small people along the way, not just dealing with the big problems, but small problems also really matter. It's kind of Aang's outlook, and I agree with that outlook. He also needs to figure out how to be an avatar, and so he's trying to connect with the past spirits of other avatars, as each avatar is a reincarnation of the last one. They're all reincarnations of each other, but they're all different people, so it's not like Aang has the past memories of every avatar, which is why he has to connect with their spirits and kind of learn from them and what they learned on their journey. At the end of the season, there is a big showdown with the Northern Water Tribe and the Fire Nation. It all comes down to this, baby. However, like all of the Fire Nation's tactics, as I have learned in this season, they are only attacking the Northern Water Tribe as a distraction so they can take out Omashu, which is a big city in the Earthbending Kingdom that Aang's friend from 100 years ago, who's still alive, it rules, and his name is Bumi. And Bumi is pretty cool. In all versions, I would say Bumi's pretty wild. So overall, when it comes to this show, there was a lot of stuff that I liked. There was some stuff that I am hopeful we're going to get into a little bit more as we go on. But let's talk about some of the stuff that I enjoyed. Chiefly among them, the bending. The bending is super cool in this show. It's so awesome to see. I do feel like Aang doesn't do enough water bending based on this being the Book of Water, but other than that, I really, really liked the bending. Also, some people were talking about how the water bending looks cheap and like people are just having water thrown on them. I don't know. To me, it just looked like water bending. There is water whips. There's some cool ice stuff that we get to see. They do other stuff with the water. They don't just throw it on people. But also, I feel like if you did get hit in the face with water, it would just look like water was thrown on you. So I didn't notice anything that looked disjointed though. I felt like it all fit with the style. So yeah, I really like the fire bending. I feel like the fire bending looks the coolest. I'm just gonna say. However, we haven't seen, obviously, only Aang is the only one airbending here. And I haven't seen a ton of earthbending. So maybe I'll change my tune by the next season. But right now, I gotta say Fire Nation's where I'm at. Even though I am a waterbender just by personality, I feel like I'd be a waterbender, but I'm looking at the firebenders and I'm like, that's hot, literally. So many kicks, that's what I feel like. A bunch of kicking. When it comes to the story, I do like the story overall, and I like the flow of it, but it does feel kind of like it's missing something. Also, the story is a little bit different from the animated series, just FYI. We're gonna get into that more later, but just a heads up. What I think it's really missing though is there's a lot of stuff that is just very like kind of in your face, where I was like, I get it. Like, I know and I get it. And maybe it's worse because I've seen the animated series. So if you haven't seen the animated series and you've watched this, let me know what you thought in the comments about what I'm about to say. I feel like there's a lot of verbatim exposition where people say things like, "You're the last airbender." And I'm like, yes, that's the title of the show. And yes, we already know that because we saw that happen. You don't have to say it. Like, I'm aware. I don't know. Sometimes I think people just want to say the title of the show, like in the show, or the title of the movie, but it feels redundant to me. There's also a lot of over-explained things via flashbacks, which happen on a loop. I felt like I was back in the flashback to tank in the Book of Boba Fett. That's how many flashbacks there were in this. Except in those flashbacks, I felt like I was getting, you know, extra bits of story, whereas in this, I felt like we were seeing the same thing again and again on a loop. And I was like, oh my gosh, how many times am I gonna see this flashback? Personally, I also think when people do that, it's kind of undermining the acting. So let's talk about the acting. Overall, the acting is great, I would say. I actually really like the acting in the show. Everyone's doing a great job. Everyone's so committed to being the character and is working with what they have. However, sometimes the flashbacks, whether that be script or editing choices or a combination of the two, really undermines the actor's abilities. So there's going to be times where I think the acting isn't going to shine as clearly, and people are actually going to see that more as it being like a decline in the acting, when really I think it's in some cases more of a script issue. There were some times though that I felt like people were kind of supposed to be in this emotional place and weren't fully there. I will say that, but it didn't really take me out of it. It wasn't super noticeable. And I also know what it's like to have to put yourself in an emotional spot on a set where a lot of people are looking at you. That's not easy, in case you were wondering. It's not easy to do. And I'm a person that can cry on command, and even I find that to be challenging at times. It's a lot of pressure. So yeah, overall, I think the acting was still really, really strong, really great. But ultimately, I think those flashbacks are undermining the actors' performances, taking away from them when we could just be staying with them in the moment and see that moment relived through their eyes, as opposed to going and seeing it verbatim. And I also feel like it undermines the intelligence of your audience when you do that, because like, we know what happened already. You don't have to keep showing it to us. Like, I know. I've already seen it 3 times. Please, just trust me. I know what's happening. I don't know if that's because they wanted to like, for it to be like for kids or something. Tonally, this doesn't really feel like it's intended for kids as much, so I'm not sure. But even then, I would say kids would even get it. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm no longer a child. I think kids are smarter than we give them credit for, in my opinion. Speaking of acting, there are a couple standout performances that I have to highlight here, which is Zuko and Iroh. Zuko is played by Dallas James Liu, and Uncle Iroh is played by Sun-Hyung Lee. They are both amazing, and watching them together is like magic on the screen. It really just brought me to tears so many times. It's just magical to get to see them together and see them bring these characters into live action and do such justice to them. Honestly, the story of Zuko just really, really hit me in this season. They just added some little embellishments. There's little things that they add to Zuko's story that add so much emotional weight. I feel like the story of the battalion and the fact that they're with Zuko there because Zuko spoke up in the war council, and that's how they end up getting there, and they resent him the whole time because honestly Zuko's kind of a jerk, which fair enough. But then when Uncle Iroh shares that with them, like that was a moment when Zuko comes back on the ship and then they're all bowing because now they know that like the only reason that they're there and not dead is because Zuko spoke up, and so they got exiled with him, but like basically he saved them through that, and they all bow to him. Oh my gosh, I was like an emotional wreck. I was like, this is so beautiful. Oh man. There's just a lot of the stuff with Zuko's story that just really hit me. And obviously Uncle Iroh is a huge part of that as well. Them together, it's just... In the animated series, they got me. And in this, they really got me. Something about live action just hits harder, I think. However, while there are these little embellishments in the story, like sort of, I would say throughout Avatar, little tweaks that they make to kind of enhance it emotionally, sometimes there's too much emotional stuff happening and it can feel like we're being crushed by emotion. And it makes it harder for you to connect with characters because it's constantly going on, so you feel like you don't get a break, and then it kind of just feels like everything's at the same level. So I think it's important when you do emotional stuff in a dramatic dramatic way. This is why sometimes we need these lighter moments, because it makes the lows feel lower. You can't really feel a low if you don't have a high, if that makes sense. And sometimes it feels like everything's kind of at this level. Like everything's just really emotionally intense, but you're going nowhere. So you're like, okay, yeah, that's sad. All right, next thing. So even though sometimes emotionally it kind of lacks depth just because we don't have as many levels, I would say what it lacks in depth sometimes in terms of it just being like very in your face and then sometimes kind of being like this in terms of emotions, it makes up for in the design elements. And I'm talking about the costumes, I'm talking about the visuals, I'm talking about the sets. Obviously I'm talking about the bending. Just on all levels, it really looks amazing. Like, wow, I want to live in the world. You feel like you're in the world. And I spoke about this with Dune Part 2, and that's another project. These are on different scales, I would say, but they're both immersive. They both really bring you into the world through their design. So ultimately, how do I feel about the live action versus the animated? Well, there are some differences. There are some differences, friends. I've talked about a few of them. The flow of the story, the way the story the order of things is a little weird, but also Aang doesn't run away. This seems to be a thing that bothers a lot of people. It didn't bother me that much, to be real with you, because I think the way they did it, it still made sense. It was more about Aang going up into the sky to clear his mind. I think that makes sense as an airbender, and then in that, he kind of gets lost and swept up in a storm. And he still feels a ton of guilt for abandoning everyone, so it's not like the guilt is gone. The guilt remains, and I think that's the most important part of that, is that Aang feels like he abandoned people. Even though, you know, he didn't really, but I think even in the original, he ran away, and he does feel guilty about it. But I feel like even when that comes out, people kind of say like he didn't know what was going to happen. And if he had stayed there, it wouldn't have gone better. It was actually better that he ran away in a sense, because he probably wouldn't have survived. I mean, granted, there would have been a new Avatar. I don't know. I just feel like I don't think it's that important that he runs away, as long as he feels bad about it. That sounds terrible, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Sokka is quite a bit different in this, in the sense that Sokka is a bit less of a jerk. I mean, he's still kind of a jerk, but he's not sexist. And that has bothered a lot of people. I will say it also kind of bothered me, because I do think it's a part of Sokka's character. And I feel like this version of Sokka is like, I just don't know what his character arc will be, because he feels like he's more accepting, like right off the bat, and he's more humble. And I'm just like, okay, but isn't the whole point of him that he's not? And then he learns to be, and then like, how will he learn things if he doesn't change? That's the whole point of the story. So I'm intrigued to see where that goes. I'm nervous about it overall. However, you should know there is still sexism. Yay, sexism is still alive and well. Hurrah! That happens at the end with the Water Tribe. The Northern Water Tribe still don't allow Katara to fight, and then she has to fight for the right to fight. And yeah, girl power, she does it. That whole part I actually enjoyed, and I thought, hey, at least they didn't remove it entirely. Because apparently the directors were saying something, don't quote me on this, I haven't read it, I just heard about it. But apparently they were saying something about how they didn't want to have it in the story because that's like kind of a thing of the past. I'm here to tell you in 2024, sexism is not a thing of the past, unfortunately. I wish, but unfortunately it is not. So I'm glad that it's still embodied in the work, because it is still important, I think, that we talk about it. It is not gone yet. We're working on it. Kind of one of those, like, there is no war in Ba Sing Se, and everyone has been joking about, like, what will that be? Because it seems like in ways they want to have like an idyllic like version of Avatar: The Last Airbender. However, I don't think they're gonna go that far, but I guess we'll see. Does propaganda exist in Avatar: The Last Airbender in 2024? We'll see. Or I guess beyond, because yeah, we'll see where that goes. I think the biggest thing that this show is missing, and that I hope we get more of in future seasons, because I did overall really like it, but this is a huge thing that's missing, is moments of levity. We don't really get these light periods. I've kind of talked about it before. It's the same issue that I have with the emotional weight that feels oftentimes like it's plateaued, so we don't get to experience it as in depth. We don't get these little side quests where they go off and just have a fun time. All the side quests feel kind of like dark. Like everything in this just feels very dramatic and dark. It's still really good, but I think you need the moments of levity so that you can really feel when it gets dark. You need the light to appreciate the dark, and vice versa. And it shows us what we're fighting for. So when we don't have that, we kind of lose sight of what the point of the story is a bit. And you know, we don't get to mourn anyone's childhood, anyone's loss of innocence, because that doesn't really exist in this version, or at least it doesn't exist as much. And I really hope that we get more of that, because I think it's important to the story. Overall rating, I want to say out of 4 elements, let's say 5, we'll include the spirits, 5th element. Out of 5 elements, I think I want to give it a 4 though. I did really like it. It just needs a little bit more. It's almost there. It's so close. It just needs, I need a little bit more. And you know, I will say that I think as a live action, it's never going to be perfect. No adaptation is ever going to be perfect, but I think this is pretty close. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm definitely intrigued to see where it goes next. And I hope we can just bring a little bit of that lightness in. Let's open the curtains. All right, friends, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this review on Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action series. I'll see you next time. And until then, stay nerdy, friends. Bye. Oh, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Boop, 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 boop.